Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about more magic decks, more pre-modern stuff. Should be pretty sweet. A lot of different decks we got talking about today. Lots of different cool tech, really sweet stuff. So let's get with it. All right, we got a fairly large tournament to cover. It's like about 40 people, and I was like, wow, that's great. We got top 16. That's great. A lot of these tournaments seem to be happening in Spain. It seems to be pretty big there, which is very cool to see. And yeah, we're going to be going through top 16 of all this stuff, and of course, starting at number 16, we got bug control. So this is just, think of typical blue-black control with splashing green for Spirit Monger and Pernicious Deed, that's sweet. I mean, what more do you want? You got some naturalized in the sideboard, but typically just a blue-black control deck. Obviously, it makes your mana base like kind of wonky, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. Not very good, but Pernicious Deed is a pretty strong card, and Spirit Monger is certainly a pretty good control win condition. And we got all sorts of typical stuff you're going to see in any sort of blue-black X control deck. Mana Leak, AK, Factor Fiction, Smother, Edicts, all sorts of good stuff. Some Prohibits, right? Duress. The only really wonky thing here, I would say Vendetta isn't very wonky, but it's not typically seen in like slower control style of decks. Although the Rock plays it occasionally, but Vendetta here again pretty good against, well, 1 mana creatures, that kind of stuff. Good against like more expensive stuff too, but losing life can be kind of, depending on the matchup, can be kind of dangerous. And of course, it doesn't hit black creatures, so that can be an issue as well. But it is a nice card to round out your removal suite. Prohibit, of course, is just sort of another card that's kind of like just another 2 mana counter that's easier to cast because it's only blue and a colorless, that kind of thing. And of course, the Veneral's Disc, rounding out the mass removal. And Disc is good. I mean, if you're looking for another effect similar to Pernicious Deed, and Pernicious Deed was a play on the Veneral's Disc, right? So, that's nice. That's nice. That works pretty well. And the nice thing is, certain cards like Mastercore and Spirit Monger play very well with Pernicious Deed, just being expensive, and if you have to deed for more, you can regenerate them, of course. And Morphling. Not a huge fan of Morphling. Pretty sure I like just Spirit Monger more than Morphling, just because its power to toughness ratio is just much better, and it hits harder without the crazy mana investment. But yeah, it's fine here, right? It's fine. It does stuff. So yeah, there you go. Everything else is pretty standard. Like for the sideboard, we have more hosers like Chill against red decks, E-Plague against tribal decks, that kind of stuff. Dust Bowl against decks with a lot on basics, things like that. Another disc, Hydroblasts, that kind of thing. So nothing too weird here. Although this is a pretty interesting take. We don't really see too many 3-color control decks because the mana is so painful and such. But this one's pretty interesting. All right, now we have a very nice, very interesting deck. I think I quite like this a lot. We got mono black. It's a sort of mono black mid range. That's clearly the deck name, but you can see, yeah, this is definitely a mono black mid range deck. Again, we got some more vendettas, so it's a little bit suicide black-ish, with the negators and so on. And the Graveborn Muse, definitely not something that's seen a ton in a lot of these decks, but it is pretty sweet. 4-mana 3/3 is okay, but with the draw effect is quite good, and it even stacks with itself. So against control decks, having 2 Graveborn Muse out is very good, where the life loss is not that important. So it's great. Does a lot of good stuff there. Again, hippies and negators, perfectly fine cards. Lots of removal, or contagion and vendetta, pretty good. And then of course Duress and Unmask and Stupor, again something that's not typically seen, but it's a pretty decent card. You get they get a discard one, and then they have to randomly discard another. That's pretty sweet, and it's pretty good with Ancient Tomb and City Traders in the mana base. So you're playing a bunch of really expensive cards, but you have a lot of these soul lands that pump them out pretty fast. I almost wonder if it might be better to play a 3-3 split, but you know, whatever. I think this is probably fine too. I mean, the City Traders is very awkward here, so you never really want to draw multiples. So a 2 of seems fine. And you know, we got some more removal, mass removal, and Power K, great against all the aggressive decks. Phyrexian Arena against anything that's slower, not super aggressive, be able to draw a lot of cards, so that's sweet. And yeah, that's basically the whole deck. You know, got some main deck mass cores against aggressive decks, very sweet there. And the sideboard, I mean, tons of great stuff. What do we got? We got Bottle Gnomes. I love Bottle Gnomes. This is so excellent against the aggressive decks, especially mono red. It's worth at least 2 cards, you know, and maybe a couple turns as they, you know, try to draw into cards that let them deal with it, or they have to 2-for-1 themselves immediately, that kind of thing. So Bottle Gnomes, very sweet here, very, very good against the red decks. Dystopia and E-Plague, a lot of these are very good against things like Elves, right? Dystopia and E-Plague are very good against Elves. Dystopia has a ton of different text against, well, anything with green and white cards, right? Especially the slower decks, which green and white decks tend to be, or at least the ones that are played mostly, so very good there. You get 2 or 3 cards off your 1 Dystopia. E-Plague has a lot of decks against not just tribal decks, but against a lot of the other, like the Phyrexian Devourer decks, Hermit Druid decks, that kind of thing. Anything really relying on 1 toughness creatures. E-Plague is pretty sweet there. Spinning Darkness gains you some life. Crypt Furnace is a great way to, you know, hit on the graveyard, of course. And Zuran Orb, I'm guessing, is just a way to gain life. So, you know, because there's a ton of cards that obviously cost life, you know, like Arena, Vendetta, things like that, or whatnot. But yeah, so Zuran Orb a little wonky, but that's okay. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's a lot better than it looks. But yeah, this deck is pretty sweet. It looks pretty good. The only thing I'm thinking, like, well, it looks like we might want to play like a few more lands or some number of wastelands or something. But hey, this guy, you know, looks like a pretty sweet deck anyways. I like this a lot. Definitely one of the better mono black sort of mid-range style decks, not like the super turbo Suicide Black. This is a little bit slower. Definitely more focused on card advantage and stuff. But with a lot of interaction for like combo and control decks and stuff. So really cool stuff here, really cool stuff here. And look at it, Arena plus Graveform use, very powerful against the control decks, you know, and you can force them through with Durasana Mass pretty easily. And yeah, a lot of good stuff here, a lot of stuff I like. So yeah. Okay, what do we got here? This is Landstill. Yep, nothing weird, same old stuff. I mean, we do kind of have like a Morphling and a sideboard, which said not a huge fan of, but whatever, I guess. I'd rather just play another Exalted Angel for sure. But yeah, it's a Landstill deck. Same old stuff you've seen pretty much every time. Plays Dismantling Blow. I think that's the only thing that's in here that's even maybe remotely spicy. I mean, the Morphling should just be another Exalted Angel, but whatever. Yeah, so this is Landstill. There you go. 14th place. Okay, and now of course we have Elves, and yeah, there we go. I mean, this has got all the Elves cards. There's only so many extra cards you can fit in here when you got, like, you know, after the lands for survival, all the required Elves, and then the random tutor targets and stuff. We see Tangle Wire in here. Tangle Wire is very good in a deck with a bunch of permanents that can crap out a bunch of permanents really, really fast. So Tangle Wire, very sweet here. And of course, the only thing that's maybe a little spicy, I can't remember if these decks tend to play Steely Resolve or not, but it's very good in a deck with, well, it's a green tribal deck, so Steely Resolve is very sweet against a lot of single target 1-for-1 removal, which can certainly be a problem for this style of deck without a ton of access to card advantage. So yeah, Steely Resolve, sweet card, good stuff here. I like it a lot. And we have Goblins. Again, about the same stuff I've pretty much said about Goblins every single time. This is, most of the stuff is all fine. Like, I like main deck PK, Pyrokinesis, I think that's fine. But only playing 22 lands is a mistake. You don't have Vile in this deck list, obviously because Vile's not legal. So yeah, there's no way you can play with 22 lands, especially splashing a color. Yeah, you got to play 2 more lands. Like, just bite the bullet and just cut the tutor targets or something. But you need to play 24 lands, especially again if you're splashing colors. So yeah, that's the only real thing that's a big deal here. Just play 2 more mountains or something, or city brass or something like that. You need more colors, especially if you want to really always be able to access your green sideboard cards more often than not. Even with the forest in the sideboard, another mountain and a city of brass probably go a long ways. But again, other than that, typical goblin stuff that we've always seen. Again, the same thing I say every time: play 24 lands, at least 23 lands, 23, 24. You can't just depend on people just not answering your Goblin Lackey all the time. So yeah, don't get too greedy with this deck, because the biggest problem with Goblins is its own inconsistency, drawing too many expensive cards and whatnot, and not being able to hit your land drops, because you can always use your mana. You're drawing so many cards, doing so many extra things. You pay 5 mana, get your Siege Gang in play. Oh, I don't need to do anything with this mana. No, you need to, you get to sacrifice cards, sacrifice your goblins with Siege Gang and stuff, play more goblins to sacrifice. So you always really want to be making your land drops every turn, and even just your land drops to hit up to 5 mana. So yeah, definitely a huge mistake not to play 24 lands. But other than that, everything else, overall, the card choices look good. Again, not a huge fan of color of the claw, but everything else looks quite nice. All right, now we have Angry Hermit. And again, what does this look like? This is the Angry Hermit plus the Phyrexian Dreadnought combo sort of jammed in here, which is pretty sweet. We've seen that before, so that's not too spicy. But we do have Mesmeric Fiend, which I can't remember off the top of my head if that is sort of a stock thing or not, but I guess that's worth pointing out. But the really spicy thing in the sideboard is stuff like Tempting Worm. Tempting Worm is very good against Sly. I mean, mostly because a lot of the stuff they're putting into play is not super impactful, and they're gonna have to, gonna X for 1 themselves to even try and answer 1 Tempting Worm. So that's a pretty interesting sort of plan that's sort of orthogonal to your regular plan and sort of exploits a weakness in their sort of deck building, right? Because their cards are somewhat low impact, so them, or at least their permanents are. So them getting some lands and a Curse Scroll or something is not a huge deal, and a Mog Fanatic or whatever, and you get like a 2-mana 5/5, which is pretty great. Obviously, don't bring this in against Goblins. You will only do that once, but it's very good against Sly. So that's a pretty interesting way to try and beat that matchup. I still would never want to play against Sly with this deck, but yeah, so that's something. So that's pretty clever, pretty clever. All right, now we have this sort of parfait-ish style deck with some interesting stuff going on here. So we got, I mean, this is like a green-white parfait deck, and we got Dueling Grounds. So this only makes 1 creature able to attack and block each turn, which is pretty sweet. Definitely slows down a lot of decks, especially weenie decks. We got stuff like Peace of Mind. Peace of Mind is great. This is a great way to turn your lands in your, from like land tax, of course, into, well, life. Obviously, again, very good against aggressive decks. And Grindstone, great against monocolor decks. Pretty interesting way to win the game outside of combat, which is nice, especially when you're playing 2 Humility main deck. Words of Worship, of course. This is not a weird thing to play in like an Enchantress or Parfait style deck, because again, gains you a lot of life. We got some Wraths, which is great. Swords, Enlightened Tutor, Disenchants, all this good stuff. And of course, main deck, we got this nice sort of juke of Exalted Angel. I think Exalted Angel is somewhat underrated in these sort of tax rack style decks or blue-white-ish control decks, because Exalted Angel is sort of like, do you keep your removal in, or do you side it out? Because outside of the main deck, 2 Exalted Angels, it's just a totally dead card, right? And it might not even matter if you do remove them at all, but if you just let them stay in play, they'll just gain a ton of life, especially if you're a deck that wants to beat them by attacking. you're not going to beat that. So, you know, it's very interesting. I think that's a little bit underexplored. Again, the sideboard Angel Gambit kind of thing is something I've always been a big fan of. Definitely making it difficult on other decks, asking certain questions. Can you beat this sort of thing that's completely different, orthogonal, right, to their typical strategy. So that's interesting. That's interesting. Lots of great stuff in the sideboard that we typically see in Enlightened Tutor style decks. Defense Grid, Ivory Mask, Black Vice, which is very great against the slower decks, control decks, that kind of thing. Cursed Totem, Karmic Justice, Sacred Ground are giving fine Copperhead. So a lot of Enchantress stuff, a lot of typical control stuff, a lot of Parfait stuff, and of course we even have Mishra's Factory. Again, this is a great win condition for control decks. And Core Haven and Dust Bowl. I mean, lots of good stuff going on here with the lands. Real sweet. So yeah, obviously this deck doesn't have land tax or scroll rack, but it does play in some of the same sort of ways that it would, but also kind of like a Enchantressy thing, even though it doesn't play the Enchantress stuff, kind of weird. So it's like a green-white control deck. So yeah. And then of course it even has Curse Scroll. Curse Scroll is great for removal, obviously without land tax. You know, you can Curse Scroll, kill creatures, eventually kill them, that kind of stuff. So you can nickel and dime people with Curse Scroll and Mishra's Factory or something late game. So yeah, a lot of really interesting stuff here. So we're seeing all sorts of different things, different engines and parts of different decks sort of put into one deck. So there's a lot of really cool stuff here. Drawing a lot of cards with Sylvan Library. Anyways, this is something to probably come back to at some point. This is a pretty interesting deck and something I'd like to maybe explore further too. But yeah, a lot of cool stuff here. So yeah, there you go. Okay, and now we have, well, it's the Rock. And yeah, nothing weird here. I think, again, I'm a huge fan of Haunting Echoes as a 1 or 2 of in these sort of black mid-range or control decks, because this card is just an absolute beating. When you draw it mid or late game, you can just rip out a ton of excellent cards from their deck, and you can seriously put people into risk of being decked. And it's just very, very strong. So that's sweet. Again, we see Vendetta here, right? So again, sometimes played in these rock style decks. They're playing 8 walls, which is usually a little bit more than they typically play. I like 6 walls, maybe 3 of each or 4 of one and 2 of the other. But yeah, that's not too bad. 8 walls, not a big deal. Very good against aggressive decks, of course. And Hidden Gibbons in the sideboard. This card is super sweet against, well, blue control decks, I should say. Excuse me. Very good against blue control decks. So yeah, they play an instant and it turns into a monkey. So it's pretty sweet. It can be kind of funky. It's a good card. It's a good card. All right, and now we have Goblins with somehow even less. This one somehow has less lands than the last deck. If you're playing 5 drops, you can't you can't play 21 lands. What are you doing? I mean, this is ridiculous. I don't know. Like I feel like I'm gonna see a Goblins deck with like 18 lands or something next. This is just not enough lands. Like, holy moly. But other than this, again, weird thing. We got main deck Blood Moon. Blood Moon is very strong against a bunch of decks that are, you know, like a lot of the multicolor decks are super non-basic heavy. Blood Moon does a pretty good job of stopping them from doing anything. So it's a really powerful card. It's a nice card to play in like the 3 to 4 slots you have. Main deck that you can play non-goblin, non-land cards. So this is pretty sweet. And of course, more or less the same stuff we see in the sideboard. Of course, Pop still works with Blood Moon. And Shatterstorm, very good against, I guess, you know, the Tinker style, Artifact style decks, Devour, that kind of thing. If those things are present, Shatterstorm is very good against them, as well as the main deck Tinkerer. So, yeah, there you go. Pretty easy peasy. All right, now we have a red-green deck, and this one, I mean, I'm not sure about the cradles in this one, but yeah, this is a pretty interesting thing. We got main deck Sky Shroud Ridgeback and Matenda Lion, very 1 mana, 2 power cards, great with Rancor. And of course, Ridgeback is really good with Reckless Abandon, so that's super sweet. But yeah, just a red-green beatdown deck. You got Shocks, Bolts, Incinerates, Giant Growth, main deck Naturalize. A lot of great stuff, a lot of good cards here. The only thing, well, the only thing really weird in the sideboard maybe would be the Skragnos. I guess that they're a little expensive for a deck with only 16 lands, as well as something like Overrun. That's definitely a little wonky. All right, and now we have Mono Blue Landstill. A lot of really cool stuff here. Actually, well, the nice thing about Mono Blue is that you get a pretty good mana base, and you can play a ton of non-basic lands. Really cool, sweet non-basic lands. So Wasteland, Mistress Factory, Fairy Conclave, of course. So you got your man lands, Wasteland for mana disruption, and Quicksand. This is a pretty sweet way for Mono Blue to get a way to kill weenie creatures, which are always a big problem for the standstill decks because, well, they'll come down before you can land your standstill, right? So big issue there. Solved pretty nicely. Of course, more removal than Disc and K, of course, as well as tons of counter magic, some card draw in Fact or Fiction and Impulse, as well as obviously Standstill. Morphling and Rainbow Efreet are sort of typical in win conditions. And same old stuff that we see in the sideboard. Teferi's Response, of course, is very good against opposing wastelands, removal on your creatures, very good. Yeah, it's real sweet because, well, Teferi's Response, draws 2 cards for 2. I mean, this card's pretty crazy, but definitely developed in a time where they were really trying to hate out Rashad Import. But yeah, Teferi's Response, a very powerful card, even it seems really narrow. I mean, it's just totally insane. Yeah, a lot of color hosers in the sideboard, Annul against artifacts and enchantments, crypts, typical stuff. So pretty interesting take on Standstill, or Landstill, I guess I should say. Okay, so now we have the Draco Explosion deck, or Draco Blast, however you want to refer to it. And this is sweet. We got some nice tech here. We got all the typical stuff: Duress, Therapy, Bolt, Incinerate, Dark Ritual, Insidious Dreams, of course, comboing with Draco. Phyrexian Arena to draw extra cards, Scroll Rack to put stuff back on top of your library if you draw, your Draco or whatnot. A lot of cool stuff here. Or if you need to put your Draco back on top after you draw it to deal another 16 zillion damage or whatnot. Or I guess you can't since you only have one Erratic Explosion, but what you do have to deal extra damage, of course, would be Skittering Scourge and Hypnotic Spectre. I think these decks typically played extra creatures, but I'm pretty sure Skittering Scourge is seeing a little bit more play in Premodern. It's just a pretty sweet, strong card in a deck with not a ton of creatures. It's a 2-mana 3/2 flyer, and the drawback is severely mitigated by just not playing a bunch of creatures. So 2-mana 3/2 flyer is pretty good in pretty much any format. So yeah, this is definitely a sweet card. This little imp does a lot of extra work, being able to close out the game, after you Draco explode someone. So pretty sweet there. Duress, Therapy. Therapy is actually good with Scourge too, because if you have extra creatures you want to play like a Hypnotic Spectre, you can Therapy and then flashback Therapy, sacking the Scourge and then playing the Spectre. Cool stuff like that. Volrath Stronghold, of course, is an interesting one. I don't think has seen play in this deck before, at least not from what I remember. But it, of course, can put Skittering Scourge back on top of your library if it gets killed or you have to sack it or something like that. So that's pretty sweet. Factories, of course, will help you close out the game as well. So that's a nice inclusion here too. And of course, the sideboard has all sorts of sweet cards. Phyrexian Negator against control decks as well as combo decks. Pyroblast against control decks or anything blue, really. Pyroclasm against weenie decks. Shattering Pulse against like the Tinker style artifact decks. Terminate. Fire Blast. 1 Fire Blast. Well, that's an interesting card. I guess it's cost 6 mana, so there is some sort of synergy with Erratic Explosion. But yeah, real sweet stuff here. Real sweet stuff. I'm a big fan. Real nice improvements to the deck. So very sweet, very sweet. All right, and what do we have here? We have the Oath Standstill deck. This plays Standstill and Oath of Druids, and it plays all sorts of things like, plays the Mistress Factory, Treetop Village sort of package to work with Oath, as well as an additional way to win the game. Disc, of course, is pretty good. It's a pretty good way to kill stuff, and it also is a good way to deal with. Well, it's a cheaper way to deal with artifacts, enchantments, and creatures. Cheaper than like a Chroma's Vengeance or something. So pretty sweet there. You can tutor it up with Enlightened Tutor, so that's nice. Again, we see a couple prohibits in addition to the counter spells and mana leaks. Guy's Blessing because it's an Oath deck. Yeah, nothing too strange here. We got the one of Treva's Ruins, right? Main deck. Planeshift Bounce Land, that thing's cool. Serenity, Ray of Revelation, a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, nothing too wonky. So same old Oath, sort of Standstill kind of deck. Very cool, very cool. It's even the deck name is even called Treva's Oath Steel. Oath Still. Why do I always pronounce that wrong? Anyways, sweet deck, cool innovations. This tournament has a ton of like really spicy stuff, really cool innovation in a lot of these decks. I'm a big fan. And speaking of innovation, we have something really spicy. The Vexing Beetle in this rock deck. Vexing Beetle in the sideboard. You can even wish for it too, main deck. So I mean, yeah, this thing is it's like a 5-mana 6/6 uncounterable against control decks, which is pretty sweet, which just stomps on basically anything they have unless they have a Humility out. So yeah, this is a really sweet card. I mean, yeah, what more do you want? It's a little wonky, like if they have a Mishra's Factory and they animate it to block and they can kill it that way. But you still have, you can deed it or whatever if they activate before they can block. But yeah, this is a pretty spicy card. I'm not sure how good it was, but I don't remember seeing it before off the top of my head. So yeah, this is sweet. Definitely play more cards from Legions. That's a sweet set. All right. And now what do we have here? We have a blue-black Stifle Knot deck. This is all about what you would expect. We got some, Togs, which is I'm a big fan of course, because, well, it's a good way to win the game and not just completely focused on something like Phyrexian Dreadnought, so it gives you more resilience to things like Disenchant or Shattering Pulse or Overload or the like. And the sideboard, we got a lot of cool stuff. Perish, Plague Spitter against the green decks, Elves and stuff. E-Plague, of course, also against Elves. Annul, Blue Blast, lots of really great cards. So yeah, the nice thing is Tog plays so well with the Dreadnought style strategy. Makes a lot of sense to include him. He's really great with tons of cantrips. Very good with Gush and all this other stuff. So yeah, this is a good way to beat down. And yeah. So I'm liking it. Yeah, you definitely want to bring in Tog after board because people bring in a ton of different hate, and you can sort of sidestep it with Tog. So that's very cool, very based. And of course, the winning deck is green white, black white, Dead Guy Ale. Very sweet card. Very sweet deck. What's with my? I can't even talk right today. I'm not a good talker today, apparently. But this deck is sweet. Nothing too weird. Same stuff we've always seen. The only wonky thing might be the Honorable Passage. I don't think those are totally stock, but these are very good against red decks, which can be very difficult. Yeah, because a lot of your disruption and creatures and stuff don't really match up well versus burn spells. Obviously, a lot of these things are kind of wonky. So. But yeah, same old stuff here, A lot of good things. The only thing I don't really like, I think that's probably one too many Tainted Field. I'd rather play like a City of Brass or play another Swamp instead of the Tainted Field, because you just really want to reduce the number of non-hands you get, just non-functional hands. The Plains, Tainted Field, Wasteland kind of hands, like not very good. And with 3 of each, like you're just gonna draw that way too much. So you definitely do need to play like another City of Brass or whatever. Like just be like, okay, whatever. I'm just gonna lose to red decks. But you can have a very good game against everything else because the disruption is very good. Duress, Verdict vindicates an excellent curve, right? If you're just playing stuff to, playing your spells. Very good against basically everything. That's not like a super aggressive deck. Arena, very good, against excuse me, not aggressive decks, but it's good against control decks, of course. And that shouldn't be surprising. And you have a lot of other really sweet cards that, for example, Withered Wretch, being able to deal with graveyards, Spectral Link's great against green decks. So, all these kind of things really add up to a very solid deck, but you really need the correct mana to cast these things and do things with them. So, Tainted Field is great if you have a swamp. If you don't have a swamp, it's not good. So you really want to mitigate that. You really want to hedge against these hands that are just non-functional. So yeah, you might want to play less Wastelands, another Swamp, or something like that. Too many Plains, -1 Plains, -1 Tainted Field, +2 City of Brass would probably be pretty good. But everything else looks very strong. This deck is very, very good against combo decks because it just plays like full spectrum dominance, right? When we're talking about disruption against combo decks, we have discard, we have permanent removal, we have fast clocks, we have card advantage, discard, one-sided death engines in Hypnotic Spectre. We can gain a bunch of life with Exalted Angel, and of course out of the sideboard we have Disenchants and Curse Scrolls and Seal of Cleansing and Perish and E-Plague and Copperhead and all. I mean, just tons of really powerful cards. But if you can't cast them, that's not very good. I mean, there's probably not a lot you can do against, Sly. You might just have to suck it up and say, whatever, just going to lose against that deck. But everything else, very sweet, very strong, and not super surprised this deck ended up winning. Because it is a very good deck, although, again, you just need to make some concessions to the mana. Especially with something like Nantuko Shade, which, like, really wants every land to be able to produce black mana. But anyways, so yeah, there you go. So yeah, a lot of really spicy decks, a lot of great decks, and I'm a big fan of that. A lot of really cool. It's good to see. It's good to see really big tournaments still happening in some places, especially as we're sort of coming out of lockdown again in most places, and that's good. Good to see big tournaments. I love it. A lot of really cool tech and innovations, which of course I'm a big fan of. I also like crabs, and that's good too. So crabs are cool, and they're kind of sweet looking. They got big claws, so that's it's a little thing you know about me now. So that's it, guys. So thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed looking over this sweet tournament with all these sweet decks, and yeah, Premodern, very cool, very sweet, and yeah. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.